The framed photographs on the wall told the story better than words. Smiling faces from decades of company banquets. Beatrice Caldwell in her prime, silver hair tucked neatly, eyes sharp with certainty. A woman who had carried the weight of an empire on her shoulders for more than 40 years. Now, her chair at the head of the table sat empty. In the mailroom below, Marcus Rivera sorted envelopes like he always had. Only now, people looked at him differently. They whispered in the hallways, measuring him with uncertain eyes. Some called him lucky, others called him unfit. But Beatrice had called him something else entirely. She had called him worthy. The company was not the same. It would never be the same. Yet in that stillness, in that silence after her departure, a single question lingered in every corridor, every office, every late-night conversation among the staff. Why him? Why had the 67-year-old CEO chosen a 26-year-old from the mailroom? The answer, as with most truths, did not begin with power or with success. It began with something smaller, something quieter, something most people would have overlooked. And to understand, we have to go back. Not with urgency, not with a rush to judgment, but with the patience to see what she saw. Long before her retirement was announced, Beatrice Caldwell had begun noticing the smallest things. At 67, she had trained herself to read people the way others read numbers. A tremor in the hand, a hesitation in the voice, the difference between someone eager to serve and someone only eager to be seen. She saw it first in the mailroom, almost by accident. While the executives rushed past with coffee in one hand and their phones in the other, he stopped. Marcus Rivera lifted his head and offered her a greeting. Not the kind polished for a resume, not the kind rehearsed for an interview. Just a quiet, genuine acknowledgement. A nod that said, "I see you. You matter." It startled her more than she admitted. For years, she had been surrounded by people who looked at her position rather than her person. Yet here was this young man, buried under stacks of envelopes and delivery carts, treating her not as a title, but as a fellow human being. The next morning, she tested her instinct. She left a file behind. A thick binder that most would simply drop on the right desk and forget. But Marcus didn't. He carried it upstairs, knocked gently, and when she opened the door, he not only returned it, but mentioned the mismatched labels inside. That detail, so small yet so sharp, stayed with her. It wasn't brilliance in the way her executives measured it. It was awareness, care. The same instincts she herself had relied on when no one thought a woman could run a company. Beatrice Caldwell did not yet know where this quiet recognition would lead. She only knew she had just seen something others had missed. And in her long life, that was often where everything began. Beatrice was not a woman who trusted easily. She had been burned too many times by smiles that masked ambition. Yet something about Marcus Rivera pressed against her caution. So she did what she had always done when instinct whispered in her ear. She tested. At first, it was simple. She asked him to deliver documents not to the assistant, but directly to her. She wanted to see if his demeanor would change in the presence of polished mahogany walls and sweeping city views. Most froze. Most stumbled over words. Marcus didn't. He placed the file gently on her desk and asked if she needed anything else before returning to the basement. No arrogance, no shrinking fear, just steady respect. The second test was more subtle. She invited him to bring coffee to a board meeting. The executives barely noticed as he set the cups on the polished table. But when she introduced a complex report, Marcus lingered for a heartbeat too long. His eyes flicked across the numbers, catching details he wasn't meant to study. Beatrice noticed the furrow in his brow, the quiet way he carried questions he never voiced. Later that week, she stopped him in the hallway. "What did you see?" she asked softly. He hesitated, glancing down as though ashamed of his own observation. Then, slowly, he said, "The projections seemed off, like they were written to please, not to warn." It was exactly what she herself had thought. For the first time in years, Beatrice Caldwell felt the faint thrill of discovery. Not in the balance sheets, not in the endless reports, but in this unassuming young man. He had no authority, no polished degree, yet he had the most valuable trait of all, the courage to see what others ignored. The test was over. She had her answer. But not everyone shared her excitement. Claire Ellis had been walking in her mother's shadow for nearly 4 decades. At 38, she had the right degrees, the right wardrobe, and the right resume. She was polished, articulate, and endlessly ambitious. For years, she assumed there was no question about succession. When the day came, the company would be hers. That certainty began to waver the first time she noticed her mother speaking to Marcus Rivera. At first, it seemed harmless, a CEO being gracious to a young worker. But then came the second encounter, and the third. And soon Claire saw a pattern. Beatrice was giving him time, attention, and something even more dangerous: trust. Claire tried to dismiss it. "He's a mailroom boy," she told herself. "This is temporary. A kindness, nothing more." Yet unease grew in her chest. She knew her mother's eyes. Beatrice Caldwell had built an empire by spotting talent where others saw none. And now those eyes were fixed on Marcus. At dinner one evening, Claire tested the waters. She mentioned her plans for expanding the company overseas, waiting for her mother's approval. Instead, Beatrice leaned back and asked, "What do you think the staff at the bottom would say about that? Do you think they'd trust our leadership if they knew we hadn't asked their perspective?" Claire froze. It was the kind of question her mother never posed before. And worse, it sounded suspiciously like something Marcus might have said. That night, Claire sat alone in her townhouse, staring at her reflection in the window. For the first time she wondered, was she not enough? Or worse, was she being replaced? The shadow of doubt had crept in, and once it took root, it refused to leave. The first time Marcus Rivera stepped into the boardroom, it was not as a participant, but as a shadow. Beatrice Caldwell had asked him to bring a stack of files, and though he expected to drop them off and retreat, she motioned for him to wait by the door. It was a world far removed from the mailroom. Polished wood, high-backed chairs, city lights spilling in through tall windows. Voices rose and fell in clipped, confident tones. Numbers debated like weapons, strategies laid out like battle plans. To most, Marcus was invisible, but not to Beatrice. She watched as he stood quietly, his gaze flicking from speaker to speaker. He did not fidget, he did not stare at the floor. He listened, fully, carefully, the way people rarely did anymore. And when the meeting ended, she asked him, almost casually, "What did you hear?" Marcus hesitated. He was no fool. A wrong word could sound presumptuous, but the truth tugged at him. "They sound certain," he said slowly, "but not united. It feels like they're defending themselves, not building together." It was a simple observation. Yet Beatrice felt something stir. The rare moment when a fresh voice cut through layers of pride and protocol. Over the weeks that followed, she found ways to bring him back. Sometimes to carry papers, sometimes to adjust a projector. Always with the same result: Marcus listening, watching, absorbing. And though he never claimed the space as his own, the room began to shift. People noticed his presence, some dismissed it, others bristled. But Beatrice Caldwell, who had weathered decades of doubt herself, let it continue. Because sometimes leadership begins not with speaking, but with seeing. And Marcus Rivera saw far more than anyone realized. It did not take long before whispers began. "Why is he here?" one executive murmured in the hallway. "He's not qualified," another said over coffee. "He's just the mailroom boy." At first, the resistance was quiet, folded into polite smiles. But as Beatrice Caldwell continued to bring Marcus into spaces that had once been reserved for the chosen few, patience thinned. Evelyn Harper, a seasoned board member with a sharp tongue and a sharper instinct for power, was the first to voice it openly. "Beatrice," she said in a closed-door meeting, "the company cannot afford experiments. We need stability. We need succession we can trust. This protege of yours is not the answer." Beatrice met her gaze, calm and steady. "I am not asking him to lead tomorrow. I am asking us to recognize potential where others see none." But her defense only fueled the rumors. Some claimed Marcus had manipulated his way upward. Others insisted Beatrice's judgment was slipping with age. Even Claire Ellis, her daughter, began to echo the board's concerns, though her words carried the weight of personal fear more than professional caution. Marcus heard the whispers too. He felt the stares, the awkward silences when he entered a room. At night, he carried them home like stones in his chest. He had never asked for this attention. He had never sought to climb so quickly. Yet here he was, placed in the center of a storm he neither created nor controlled. Still each morning he returned, quiet, steady, determined, because somewhere deep inside he knew the whispers mattered less than the woman who continued to believe in him. But belief, no matter how strong, could not silence doubt forever. One evening, after a particularly harsh exchange in the elevator, two executives laughing about the delivery boy who thought he was a strategist, Marcus Rivera found himself alone in the dim mailroom. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the air stale with the smell of paper and ink. He sank into a chair, his head heavy in his hands. Memories rose unbidden. His mother working double shifts to keep food on the table. The dreams of finishing college that had slipped away when the bills came faster than the paychecks. He had taken the mailroom job out of necessity, not ambition. And now, somehow, that choice had placed him in a spotlight that felt unbearably hot. "I don't belong here," he whispered to the empty room. It was then that Darnell Brooks, his longtime friend and fellow mailroom worker, walked in. He leaned against the doorway, watching quietly before speaking. "You know what I see? I see a guy who doesn't realize he's already doing what leaders do. You listen, you notice, you don't talk just to be heard." Marcus shook his head. "They'll never accept me." Darnell stepped closer. "Maybe not. Maybe they never will. But Beatrice does, and if someone like her thinks you belong, maybe you should start believing it too." The words settled into Marcus like a lifeline. The doubts didn't vanish. But for the first time in weeks, he lifted his head, breathed deeply, and considered the possibility that his place was not an accident. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Claire Ellis had spent her entire adult life preparing for a single destiny, to inherit the company her mother had built. She carried it like a crown waiting to be placed upon her head, earned, in her eyes, by years of education, sacrifice, and shadowing Beatrice Caldwell herself. But now, that crown felt threatened by someone who had never been in the running. The confrontation happened not in a boardroom, but in the hushed hallway outside. Marcus Rivera was leaving late one evening, a stack of envelopes tucked under his arm, when Claire appeared. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate. She did not smile. "You know what you're doing, don't you?" she said, her voice low but firm. Marcus blinked, unsure. "I'm just doing my job." Claire let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Your job is to sort mail, yet somehow you've become the subject of boardroom whispers. Somehow, my mother spends more time with you than with her own daughter. Do you really think you belong here?" The words stung, sharper than any rumor he'd overheard. He wanted to argue, to explain that he hadn't asked for this attention, that he had never once stepped beyond what was asked of him. But instead, he said softly, "I don't know if I belong. But she seems to think I might." Claire's eyes flashed. "She's wrong. And when she realizes it, you'll be gone, and everything will return to its rightful place." She turned and walked away, her perfume lingering in the air like a closing door. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, the echo of her words pressing heavy against his chest. He did not see the security guard watching from the far end, shaking his head. People saw more than Claire realized, and sometimes the truth revealed itself not in anger, but in who carried themselves with grace under its weight. Weeks later, the opportunity came quietly, disguised as routine. A mid-level manager had resigned unexpectedly, leaving a gap in the quarterly meeting. Beatrice Caldwell, without announcing her reasoning, turned to Marcus Rivera. "You've been watching," she said. "Now let's see if you can speak." The room was full that morning. Executives in pressed suits, board members with folded arms, Claire seated rigidly at her mother's right hand. Marcus stood at the front, a single sheet of notes trembling faintly in his grasp. He cleared his throat, the silence pressing in. "I'm not here with a grand strategy," he began, his voice steady but humble. "I'm here with something smaller. The patterns I've seen, day after day, from the bottom floor up." He spoke of late-night deliveries, of seeing managers leave after hours carrying work home while others slipped away early. He spoke of employees in the basement who felt invisible, yet knew more about the company's culture than most vice presidents. He spoke not with jargon but with the truth of observation. For a moment the room was silent. Then Evelyn Harper leaned back in her chair, narrowing her eyes. "And what are we supposed to do with your observations?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, then lifted his chin. "Listen, because if we don't, the cracks at the bottom will one day shake the foundation at the top." It was not a polished presentation. It was not the language of an MBA, but it was honest, unvarnished, and real. And for Beatrice Caldwell, who had once been dismissed with the same skepticism, it was more than enough. She allowed the silence to linger before she spoke. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the clearest view comes from the ground floor." The seed was planted, and though many in the room resisted it, none could deny that Marcus Rivera had made them pause. Success, even small, has a way of stirring envy. Thomas Reed, the company's chief operating officer, had spent decades waiting for his moment. Loyal, calculating, and ever in Beatrice Caldwell's shadow, he assumed he would one day inherit the seat when she stepped down. But now her attention was elsewhere. Not on him, not even on her daughter, on a mailroom worker. The insult burned. And so, one evening, as files for an upcoming audit circulated, Thomas made his move. A key document vanished, not destroyed, merely displaced, just enough to cause delay, just to raise suspicion. And when questions arose the next morning, the missing trail pointed neatly, almost too neatly, toward Marcus Rivera. Whispers spread quickly. He's careless. He's not ready. This is what happens when you bring amateurs into the boardroom. Marcus felt the weight of it before anyone spoke directly. Beatrice called him into her office, the missing file between them. Her eyes, sharp as ever, searched his face. "Did you misplace it?" The shame of accusation pressed hard against him. "No," he whispered. "I checked it twice. I know I left it on the table." For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. Not because she didn't trust him, but because the stakes were too high for trust alone. That evening, Marcus sat alone in the quiet mailroom again, his hands trembling. For all his efforts, for all his quiet victories, a single shadow could undo it all. He wondered if Claire had been right, if Evelyn had been right, if perhaps he was only ever meant to sort envelopes and nothing more. But somewhere deep inside, a memory stirred. His mother's voice, tired but unwavering. "Don't let them decide your worth, Marcus. You decide it." The betrayal had landed, but the story, he realized, was far from finished. In the end, the story was never just about a mailroom or a boardroom. It was about a glance that became trust, a trust that became legacy, and the reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary beginnings are hidden in the quietest corners. Beatrice Caldwell left her chair, but she left something more behind, the courage to see worth where others overlook it. And Marcus Rivera carried that weight, not as a victory, but as a question. What will I do with the chance I've been given? Maybe that's the lesson for all of us, that no life is too small to hold promise, and no act of faith too simple to change the course of a future. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Marcus Rivera's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Marcus Rivera's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.